Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today I'm going over an article by WCVB. This is a very big news source in the city of Boston, which talks about could former Republican Governor Charlie Baker be considering a run for the U.S. Senate against Democratic Senator Ed Markey. So could former Massachusetts Governor Charlie Baker, currently the president of the NCAA, be considering a return to elected office? Quote, "It certainly looks that way," said Mary Ann Marsh, a Democratic analyst, said during a discussion for Sunday's year-end review episode of WCVB's On the Record. Baker is in Massachusetts all the time, endorsing candidates, doing the Boston Pops, all of it. He certainly looks like someone who's running, said Marsh. Baker, a Republican, took a ceremonial long walk out of the Massachusetts State House in 2023 after the end of his second term. He chose not to run for a third term and was replaced by Governor Maura Healey. What office could the former governor be angling towards next? Marsh and Rob Gray, a Republican analyst, said they think he could be contender for the U.S. Senate race. Senator Ed Markey confirmed on a previous episode that he is running for a third term in 2026. However, he is, I believe, 79 years old. Republican candidate John Deaton fell far short in his campaign against Senator Elizabeth Warren in November, but our analyst suggests that Baker would have a much stronger position starting against Markey. Baker would have a chance to win, said Gray. I mean, he's the exception. He's run twice for governor and won successfully. He can raise the money, and Ed Markey has a lot of problems. In Democrat-dominated Massachusetts, however, Baker could face a concern about adding a Republican to Congress during President Donald Trump's second term. Voters will have hesitation about sending another Republican to Washington, but Charlie Baker has been very anti-Trump, so maybe they'll look the other way, said Gray. For Baker, it would also mean giving up his $3 million annual salary from the NCAA, and do you really want to keep doing NIL deals with college kids, Marsh asked. Right, instead of getting beat up by a congressional committee like Charlie Baker did recently, he could be on the committee asking the questions. So this is a very fascinating conversation to have, and I'm really just interested in having this. The 2026 U.S. Senate race in Massachusetts is up, and Ed Markey is running reportedly for re-election. He was reelected in 2020 with 66.2% of the vote. I'll show you now what it looked like in 2022. Or no, not 2022, I'm sorry, in 2020. Ed Markey got 33.1% margin of victory, getting 66.15%. The Republican Kevin O'Connor got 33.04%. So, last time around, Ed Markey certainly won in a very big margin. This same Senate race back in 2014, the first time Markey won, he won this race by 23.9%. Again, this was 2014, one of the best years for Republicans in a very long time, on the same ballot, by the way, when Charlie Baker did win the governor's election. So, at very least, Ed Markey has won by over 20 points both times he has run for office. But let's just go with the hypothetical scenario. Markey is 80 years old, and he has declared he's going to run despite calls for him to retire due to his age. The only really well-known potential Republican candidate is Charlie Baker. And the elephant in the room here is it's pretty evident Charlie Baker is the only Republican in Massachusetts that will even come close to making this race potentially competitive. The only problem is, in 2024, yes, Donald Trump, a lot of Republicans in Massachusetts, some love him, some don't. Donald Trump only got 36% of the vote in Massachusetts in 2024. At the same time, on the Senate race, this was John Deaton versus Elizabeth Warren. John Deaton's a lot more moderate of a Republican than Donald Trump is. He did do about 4% better, but still, Elizabeth Warren won by 20%, 60% to 40%. So for Baker versus Markey, for Baker to win, it would have to count on Markey doing about at least 15 to 20 points worse than what Elizabeth Warren did. And is that necessarily possible? Well, the only poll that's been done by Mass Inc., this was back in October to November, did have Charlie Baker starting out 40% over Markey's 34%, but that also led 19% undecided. I actually think a perfect example for how I think this race could go is like the 2024 U.S. Senate race in Maryland. And follow my thought process on this. Democrat Angela Alsobrooks defeated former Republican Governor Larry Hogan, who, like Baker, was a more liberal to moderate Republican that was very critical of Donald Trump, 54.64% to 42.84%. And look, this was about a 12-point win. At the same time in Maryland, Kamala Harris defeated Donald Trump by over 30 points, or just about 30 points. So Hogan did much better than Donald Trump in the state of Maryland. That's the good news. Similarly, again, about what's this? A 29% win for Harris over Trump. Massachusetts, about a 26-point win. So relatively similar. And then the Senate race, again, this was about a 20-point win for Warren over Deaton, whereas also Brooks won by about 12%. It's really just, could Baker outperform expectations here? Because, look, if Baker does run, I think at very least makes this race more interesting and potentially could be competitive. But it's such a heavily Democratic state that Republicans could win governor's elections in a Democratic state like Maryland, like Massachusetts, but a Senate race is a completely different ballgame. Because we did kind of see something similar in Maryland, where it looked like in the early polling, let's see if Wikipedia has it, I believe they do, things actually started out with Larry Hogan leading over her. And it makes sense. Larry Hogan's popular former governor. He's likely a name a lot of people have heard of. She was a first-time candidate, so maybe she was not as well known. But then, as things started to get closer and closer to the summertime and to the election, things started to shift a little bit, where we've seen the Democratic, safe Democratic state start to gain support for also Brooks. But still, she was leading here by about like 7 points, 10 points, 9 points going into election day, and then we started to see things slowly break away a little bit in the final polls. Not drastically, but we started to see the averages be about 10 points. Which, again, for a safe Democratic state, which Kamala Harris defeated Donald Trump in by almost 30 points, a 12-point win for the Democrat over the Republican is probably the best the Republicans could do. The point I'm making here is, yes, Larry Hogan is not Charlie Baker, but then again, they kind of are the same type of person. A popular Republican governor who has not been governor for about 4 years, who has been very critical of Donald Trump, running in a safe Democratic state. And just for the sake of argument, in case anyone is not familiar with who Charlie Baker is, back in 2014, Charlie Baker won the Massachusetts governor's race. I believe the first time a Republican held the seat since Mitt Romney. And Charlie Baker won after 2 terms of Deval Patrick against Democrat Martha Coakley by 1.9%. I think everyone looks back on Charlie Baker and thinks of the blowout win he did have in 2018, but I think a lot of people also forget Baker barely got elected in 2014 in what was a great Republican year. He was barely able to pull off a win, but everyone thinks of him as the big electoral juggernaut in Massachusetts that he is. But it was a very close race. He won with a plurality of the vote, where a third-party candidate got over 3% and likely helped him win this race. And if you look at 2018 now, Baker did win this race by 33 points. And this is where Republicans get excited, is they see that number and think, okay, well, what could happen? And again, Baker got 66%. Looking at 2022, the next time this race was up, Maura Healey won by 29.2%. So, yes, Charlie Baker, a few things can be true at once. For one is, Ed Markey, of the 2 Democratic Massachusetts senators, Ed Markey is the more endangered of losing of the 2. Charlie Baker, of all the Massachusetts Republicans, is probably the best chance the Republicans would have at winning this race. Does this mean this race is actually winnable for the Republicans if Charlie Baker does run? I personally wouldn't go there yet. Because, as I mentioned with Larry Hogan, even though he was a popular former governor in a very blue state, he was able to cut the margins in half of Trump's numbers. 2026, a midterm election, likely going to be a repudiation on how President Trump is doing as president. Typically, it does favor the party that's not involved in office. So, just talking it out, on the same ballot where there's 45 Democrats, 51 Republicans, and a supposedly Democratic wave year, we're going to see states like potentially Georgia flip to the Republicans and Michigan maybe flip to the Republicans. We're going to see Massachusetts nearly flip to the Republicans too. I personally don't see it. I will say this, if Charlie Baker does declare he's running for this race, I do think I would have it start out as likely Democrat instead of safe Democrat. And just for transparency, likely Democrat for me is 5% margin of victory up to 15% margin of victory. So it's kind of a large spread. I can't put this race at under 5 points yet. I need to see more polling data that shows Baker actually has a chance on this one. But the conversation of Charlie Baker running is a fascinating conversation. It's a safe Democratic win if he doesn't. It's a likely to lean if he does. But look, I think it's a good strategic move from the Republicans if Baker were to run, but if Republicans used it as sort of a distraction to invest more money into like Michigan and North Carolina and Georgia. If the Republicans throw in a lot of money into Massachusetts like they did with Maryland last time, it's likely not going to work out and only going to hurt their chances in other races. But in terms of the strategy of this, it's a very fascinating conversation. We could see Charlie Baker return to Massachusetts politics in 2026. Objectively speaking, like if I was advising Charlie Baker, I would say run against Maura Healey in 2026 for governor. I think that is a much more winnable race as a Republican in Massachusetts winning a governor's race than winning a Senate race. For some reason, Massachusetts, like a lot of these states, is very keen on electing Republicans for governor, but not at all for senator. And I think that would happen to Baker again. Lastly, I just wanted to finish with one comparison, and this is actually going to be the North Carolina Senate race. And this is where I think things differ, because one of the rumored candidates for this race is Democratic outgoing Governor Roy Cooper. The difference between a Roy Cooper and Charlie Baker, though, is North Carolina seems to have a history of voting for Democratic governors, just like Massachusetts seems to for being Republican governors. Even though North Carolina is a swing state, it's typically voting Republican at the presidential level. Massachusetts always votes Democrat at the presidential level. The difference is, when you look back at how Tom Tillis has performed, he got in 2020 less than 50% of the vote, getting 48.69%. Back in 2014, when he won, he got 48.82%. So Roy Cooper running, even though North Carolina, in my view, is a lean Republican state just across the board, a Senate election with Roy Cooper in it is a lot more intriguing because Tom Tillis is a very vulnerable incumbent who is yet to break 50% of the vote, whereas both times third-party votes have bailed him out. Ed Markey in Massachusetts, he's gotten over not only 50%, nearly 66% in 2020, and back in 2014, 61%. So for Baker to win, he needs to make up about 20 points to be able to win this race, which is why I'm personally skeptical. But at very least, this is a very fascinating situation. There's not been a very competitive race in Massachusetts since Scott Brown versus Elizabeth Warren back in 2012. So this will be a very fascinating one to watch, and I'm certainly looking forward to seeing if this develops. Again, Baker is only a potential candidate. He's not announced yet if he will run. This is something very interesting and something I'm definitely keeping an eye on because this is a very interesting development. So that was it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to leave a comment below telling me what you think of this video and what you think Charlie Baker's chances would be if he did run for Senate. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. Please remember to give the video a like, click subscribe, share with your friends and family. I hope to see you in a future video. That will do it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to give it a like. And if you really liked it, please remember to click the subscribe button. And make sure you turn post notifications on so you always get notified when I post a new video. That way you never miss one. Also, please remember to share this video with your friends and family if you really like the video. And remember to stay tuned because I'll be posting at least one video every single day leading up until Election Day. So I'd really appreciate it if you keep coming back and watching those videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in a future video.